now adjourn. The Honourable Member for Saanich Gulf Islands.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Keeping close eye on my clock as I begin 4 minutes to pursue a question that I asked in question period. It was on the 30th of May of this year that I put to the Minister of Environment at the time, as we were in the midst of wildfires, unprecedented wildfires through the prairies, and the state of emergency as it existed in several prairie provinces. And I pointed out that we were now only, at the last count, 7% below 2005 levels, with a due date for our emissions reductions to 40 to 45% by 2030. The response from the Honourable Minister of Environment was not to answer the question that I'd asked, which was, when will the government present a plan? We've certainly, by that time, we knew that the new government under the new Prime Minister was cancelling plans put in place by the previous government. So my question was very pressing. We know we're not close to meeting our target at May 30th, that's due in 5 years. But when will the government replace the things that are being cut that deal with emissions reduction so that we have a chance to ensure a livable world for our children? The minister didn't actually answer the question as to when we'd see a plan, but she did confirm that, quote, we will make sure we reduce our emissions, fight climate change, and keep Canadians safe. Well, here we are, and it's some months later, and we now have the very clear and devastating report from the Canadian Climate Institute that takes us forward and says what we can now expect in terms of emissions reductions from Canada. The legally binding targets that we file that are called nationally determined contributions, once filed with the United Nations under the terms of the Paris Agreement, which I have to say Canada took a lead role in negotiating that, just as we did back in 1992 with the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, we were the first industrialized country to both sign and ratify that treaty. It's legally binding, and through it, our Paris Agreement targets are legally binding. So our commitment to reduce our emissions 40 to 45% below 2005 levels by 2030, we knew we were falling short when I asked the question in May. Now we know from the Canadian Climate Institute report of a few days ago that this is how far we're behind. We can expect at this point we're on track to reduce our emissions by 20 to 25% below 2005 levels. Now, these numbers make people's eyes glaze over. What does it mean? Well, it means we're on track for, when people speak of drought in the prairies in a particularly bad year, it's a trend that may well be unstoppable of not drought as individual episodes, but of aridification as a process that will dry out areas that are breadbaskets and make it very, very difficult for prairie farmers to survive. When we look at what's happening across the country, we're seeing wildfire after wildfire, extreme flood events, extreme heat dome events, and around the world, we're seeing people dying from the effects of climate crisis, and we know what must be done, we understand what must be done, and yet we fail to do it. Is it cognitive dissonance? Is it opportunism and political strategies that come ahead of saving the lives of our own children? I ask the Minister, when will we see a plan?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Environment and Climate Change.
Madam Speaker, Canadians are living through the climate crisis in real time. Fires, floods, droughts, and storms are happening with a frequency and severity we have never seen before. I have family and friends who have lived through these events. The impacts on lives, livelihoods, and communities are clear. The costs are growing each year. That is why climate action is not optional. It is essential to protecting Canadians, strengthening our economy, and preparing for the future. Canada does have a plan. We are committed to fighting climate change and are working to launch a climate competitiveness strategy soon to advance that commitment and to position Canada to lead in a global economy that increasingly wants decarbonized goods, services, technology, and know-how. Achieving this requires a coordinated mix of measures that both cuts emissions and builds resilience against climate risks. Since 2015, Canada has made significant progress. Back then, projections showed emissions rising 9% above 2005 levels by 2030. Today, we have bent that curve downward. Greenhouse gas emissions in 2024 were 7% below 2005 levels, even as the population and economy grew. Canada's economy is now over 30% less carbon intensive than it was in 2005. A key part of this progress is reducing methane, a potent greenhouse gas responsible for about 30% of observed global warming to date. Between 2013 and 2023, fugitive methane emissions in Canada's oil and gas sector decreased by 33%. Canada is now a co-convener of the Global Methane Pledge, leading international efforts to cut methane emissions by at least 30% by 2030. At home, we are on track to exceed that goal with more than a 30% reduction expected. These actions deliver multiple benefits: cleaner air, fewer health impacts, and a competitive advantage for Canadian energy and technologies in a world increasingly focused on low-carbon solutions. At the same time, Canada is investing in resilience. The National Adaptation Strategy was developed in collaboration with provincial and territorial governments, Indigenous partners, the private sector, non-governmental organizations, adaptation experts, and youth. Its goal is to guide actions across 5 key areas, including disaster preparedness, health and well-being, nature and biodiversity, infrastructure, and the economy and workers. The Government of Canada Adaptation Action Plan was released alongside this strategy. It outlines over 70 actions to guide federal contributions to achieving Canada's adaptation goals. Canada's National Adaptation Strategy sets out a vision for safer communities, stronger infrastructure, and a more resilient economy. Madam Speaker, the government's plan is clear. We are cutting emissions, investing in clean industries, and building resilience. These steps are credible, measurable, and designed to protect Canadians while growing a strong, sustainable economy. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The honourable member for Saanich Gulf Islands.
Another opportunity to welcome a new member to this place representing Vancouver Quadra, and I do believe, I hope, in the language of Musqueam people, which I think is Helkaminam, Haishka Siem. Unfortunately, there wasn't an answer there for when we would see the new programs that replace eliminating the consumer carbon price. There's not an answer there for what we're going to do if there's a pause on electric vehicles. With my 30 seconds left, I'll only ask this question of the honourable member. How do we explain to our grandchildren that we let them down so badly, that we failed to take the steps that we could take when we still had time to ensure a viable biosphere and a livable human civilization for them? The scientists are clear. Why do the politicians fail the children?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
And, thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you to my colleague, and in my language, Hukminam Nametqua. Canadians expect climate action that is practical, science-based, and effective. That is what is underway. Our plan combines emission reductions, particularly in methane, with investments in clean energy and resilience tools that help communities prepare for the risks that we already face. Progress is real. Emissions are declining. The economy is becoming less carbon intensive, and Canadian innovations are helping lead the global transition. Meeting our Paris targets requires steady work and collaboration with provinces, territories, Indigenous communities, and industry. Canada is committed to this path because a safe, clean, and competitive future depends on it. Thank you, Madam Speaker.